Hi, and welcome to today's event, which is Read On, where we are interviewing Marie-Louise Fitzpatrick on her book On Midnight Beach. So, Read On is a European project which is delivered through 7 partner organisations across 6 EU countries: Ireland, Italy, Norway, Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom. The Irish component of the project is being delivered by West Cork Music, and training for this activity was provided by Graffiti Theatre Company. The activity focuses on the development of skills for how to conduct an interview and analyse a text, facilitated interactions between young people and authors, and taking an active role in presenting authors and their works to a broader public. Read On is undertaken with the support of the Creative Europe programme of the European Union and Arts Council.
Okay, first of all, Marie-Louise, welcome. And would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
I am a writer-illustrator, so I both write and illustrate books. I started out as a picture book maker. My first book was published in 1988, so I've been doing it for a long time. And then in 2006 I had my first novel published, and I've been doing both since then.
Thank you very much, that's very interesting. Would you mind telling us a bit about what inspired you to modernise Irish folklore, like you did in your book On Midnight Beach?
When I was a student, I really wanted to do something. I thought someday I'll make a picture book out of the town. I really thought I could do it, but then as I started to become a picture book maker, I realised the story is just way too violent for that age group, so I gave up the idea. And then I'd say it was around 2003, somebody said to me, if you have any old ideas that you just put to one side, have you ever thought of going sideways with them, doing something different with them? And that night, just as I was dropping off to sleep, I didn't even know I still had the thorn in my head. It just popped into my head, YA. You could do the thorn as YA. And I immediately got the Dolphin, the date I was going to do it in, and the ending, right down to what happens at the very end, all came immediately. So I had to wake myself up, write it down, because I knew I wouldn't remember in the morning, write it down, and that was my entrance into modernising it.
So, in the book On Midnight Beach, it's set in Donegal. Was there any particular inspiration for the setting of the novel?
It had to be Ulster because the town is an Ulster legend, but because I had it set in 1976, I didn't want to put it in the 6 counties because then it had become part of the Troubles. It would be very, very difficult. 1976 was a really awful summer. There were a huge number of people killed. So Donegal was sort of the sensible place to put it. I was in Ulster, but not right in the trouble zone. So Donegal seemed like a good answer to the best place to put it.
And why did you set it in 1976, like specifically?
Specifically, 1976, okay, I mean, we're here, it's July, it's raining. 1976, we had the most amazing summer. Anybody who was alive in 1976 remembers it. Even if they were only 6 years old, they'll say, yes, I remember that summer. It was 3 months of incredible temperatures. We were t-shirts, shorts all summer long. The windows were open. The dams providing water sank. I remember in Bleston Lakes, the village that was drowned for the reservoir for Dublin, the spire of the church appeared out of the water, and the tarmac was sticking to your sandals. It was incredible. There were plagues of ladybirds. So it's a really memorable summer. Also, I was 14, and it was the first time I went to the Gaeltacht, first boyfriend, so it was a very significant summer for me personally. And also, no mobile phones, no computers. It's amazing how difficult they make writing a story. You know, why couldn't you get in touch with somebody easily? 1976 you couldn't. I mean, a lot of houses didn't have phones in 1976, so you had to go to a payphone, you know. So it just made it much easier for me. And also it was easier for me to write my first romance to write it from the point of view of my teenage self was a lot easier than trying to get my head into present day teenage as well. That was 2 jumps instead of 1. So that's my reason.
In the novel, the dolphin, Rin, obviously plays a big part. Was there any reason you picked a dolphin, because they don't generally pop up in Irish folklore or legend? Was there a reason you picked a dolphin to be the centre point of the novel?
Yep. That night that I got the idea, I always thought, if you're going to do this story like bulls, we don't have the thing about bulls that they had in ancient times. There are bulls in Greek myth, there are bulls in Roman myth, and bulls in Irish myth, because they were important animals. But what teenagers were going to be bothered if somebody tried to kidnap a bull in 1976?
Yeah.
But and that's an important part of the legend. So I suddenly realised male dolphins are bulls. You call them bulls. So as soon as I made that jump, and then of course I was thinking of fungi, the dingle dolphin, and I was actually told, I don't think this was true, but I was actually told back a few years after fungi appeared that a neighbouring, well, I won't say which town, but a town across the way from Dingle attempted a kidnap. So it suddenly just popped back into my head, and there I had the basis of the story. And of course Dolphin was going to give me lovely scenes and a really nice storyline, unlike an actual bull.
Did you have any challenges in adapting what is a very old story in a very old setting to this more modern setting?
Yes and no. I mean, it felt kind of audacious to even take on 2 of our biggest heroes in Maeve and Cuchulainn. So I was nervous about that. I was particularly nervous about Maeve. She's such an iconic figure to Irish women. But she just turned up. I ignored her until she came, and then she just turned up and started talking, and she wrote herself. I actually, in the early stages, I had another strand with the Morrigan, the goddess of war, and she was an old woman in my strand, and there was magic in it, and the dolphins had voices. So it was a bit of a mess early on, and then I decided, no, one day I just went in, deleted 15,000 words, and the minute I did it, everything just started to breathe, and Gus and Eemer sort of stepped forward and took over the story. And I took the magic out. There's only a tiny trace of magic there that most people probably wouldn't notice. Just one moment with Lou, Dog's father, when Dog kind of comes back after the 3 days and he's kind of miraculously better. I left that in. My editor was slightly alarmed by it, but I said no, I want to leave it in, because Lou's a god in the original, so I left that in, but most people won't notice it. I can see some of you did, because you're nodding.
So, as you're saying, you based some of the characters off Cuchulainn and Maeve, and obviously you're saying just there that Lou was a god of sorts. But did you base any of the other characters in the story off, let's say, Irish folklore or people you may know yourself?
Nearly all of the characters have a counterpart in the original. Like Fergus, Gus is Fergus, Ali is Allil, Maeve's husband. Connor is the King of Ulster, Conor MacNessa. Even Ned and Ratty, they're 2 henchmen of Maeve in the original. So nearly all of them. Rory, it represents the boy troop. So he's just one boy representing a troop in the original, but what happens to him, the boy troop are slain in the original, and it drives Cuchulainn into a frenzy, and he kills hundreds of people when he comes back after his 3 days with his father. So Rory is that figure in it. So they all have a counterpart in the original.
What was your favourite character to write?
Gus came easily, and I think that's because Fergus in the original, unlike a lot of characters in myth, they can be very 2-dimensional. Fergus in the original is really human. I read the translation, Kinsella's translation, when I was 17, and I read it again in preparation for writing this. It really just struck me how real and flawed and human Fergus comes across on the page towards everybody else. Maeve does too. Cuchullin's kind of distant. He's quite two-dimensional. He's the hero figure, and I found him difficult to find. In the end, I just had to relax and think, just if he was a real boy, stop trying to make him like the book, because it was too difficult. But Fergus just came onto the page easily. And Maeve, when she turned up with the swagger.
Is there any characters that you relate to more than others in the novel?
Probably Eemer. She's not me, but she'd be a bit like me, I suppose. She's mature in some ways and very naive in other ways, unlike her friend Fee, who's more streetwise, if you like. And I suppose that would have been me when I was that age too. And she's like a few girls I knew too when I was a teenager. So I enjoyed writing her.
Why did you choose the ending that you did?
Well, there's kind of two endings. So the first ending is the ending that belongs to the legend, where the two boys are fighting and end up killing each other. The ending, which I won't actually say because I suppose it's a surprise. So the ending that I went for, I wanted there to be hope at the ending. My version is really anti-violence, if you like, whereas I think now I see the really ancient legends, they're almost like blockbuster movies. It's complete gratuitous sex, complete gratuitous violence, just death and blood everywhere, and everybody being told how wonderful they are for killing hundreds of people. And I suppose setting it in modern times, it's far more problematic. You really see the violence as violence. So even the small amount of violence that I reduced it to is so much more problematic, and that's what I wanted. But I wanted love to be coming up against that. And Eemer is the one who's looking on and seeing the violence for what it is. And I wanted a hopeful ending. So for me, her leaving is hopeful, and Gus's leaving. I felt they're escaping. They're escaping from something stifling, towns that were going to stifle them.
Did you find it hard to, narrow down or cut out a lot of the violence that would have been in the original tale and cut that out of their final draft, I suppose?
The big key for me was making the characters teenagers and setting it in two small towns. And the minute I reduced everything down to just the main cast of characters, you could cut out all the violence. I mean, thousands of people die in the town. It's just a bloodbath from start to finish. And so once I reduced it down, everything became simpler and smaller and more intense, if you like, because it was down to human scale, I suppose. The town kind of takes place all over the country. So it just reduced everything down, made it easier to handle.
Would you mind telling us a little bit maybe about your writing process? Like, where do you go to write? Where do you get your ideas? And that kind of thing.
I'm pretty dependent on ideas popping into my head. So, I mean, I told you that I was thinking about writing the town when I was 17. So it's a long time to have an idea back here, and I didn't even know it was still there. And then it pops out. So that's, at the moment, I'd have multiple ideas sitting, waiting for me to get to them. It took me about 3 years to develop the idea, hitting off it every now and then. I don't mean 3, I would have been working on other books. And I'd just written down notes every now and then. And then I would have gone and done my research, read a couple of the translations from the early documents, manuscripts of the Táin, and then written a first draft. And always with novels, my first drafts by hand. And I have a few reasons for that. One is I write really fast. I can't type that fast. But the main reason for not typing it is if I typed it into the computer, I'd go back in and I'd try to retype it. And I'd keep going in to retype it because, you know, just the idea of retyping it, starting again. Whereas if I write it by hand, I've no choice. In fact, when I go back to that original handwritten manuscript, it's very freeing to write it by hand. And I literally am not worried about how I'm writing it. It's a thing called an SFD, which stands for shitty first draft. And it's all about I'm not worried about what I'm writing. I'm not stopping myself, not thinking about making nice sentences, none of that. And I can't even read what I've written. I write it so badly and it's full of lines and I'm scribbling out. And when I go back to read what I can read, I literally just glance over a chapter, put it over there and start to type. I'm not looking at what I wrote. And when I start to type, something completely different comes out. I make this huge jump to the typed draft. Now that typed draft I see as the first real draft, and then there'll be draft after draft of that. But at that point I am working in that computer draft. So it's layer after layer. And as I say, at some point I turfed out a whole section of the book. And then it's gone back in and gone back in, and eventually it's editing. You know, you're down to the editing stage and at that point I'd be working with an editor, going through looking for mistakes, looking for errors.
Now, when you're writing a novel, would you ever bounce ideas off friends or family to get their opinion on different things?
I usually get somebody to read it that I trust, to give me another point of view. My agent read it a few times for me and said I didn't get this bit, and she's English, so she would have had no knowledge of the original. And similarly, my editor is English, so they had no idea of the original legend. So they were all coming fresh to it. So they would have all given me feedback. And it was actually very early feedback from an editor who didn't take it that led me to take out that section that wasn't working. Because they said, it's stunning, but it's a mess. so that certainly helped me just get in there and cut. And I actually like editing. That's probably because I'm a picture book writer and I'm used to reducing things. So I like cutting. I love the feeling of it tightening up and getting cleaner and just tighter. That feeling of it just getting more and more clean and ready to read.
So a lot of authors maybe have a specific person that they're writing for when they're writing books. Is that the case for any of your books that you write?
I was thinking about that question because I get asked it a lot, and I'm not thinking of anybody in the early stages. It's really the idea wants to come out, and if anything, I'm writing for the characters because they're demanding to be written. When I get to the editing stage and I'm quite a long way in, then I start to think, what age group is this for? And if it's for younger kids, have I written it too old? If it's for older kids, am I writing it too young? Then I start to think of who's reading it, but not in the early stages.
When you're, going through your first, second, third drafts, would you ever find it hard to try think of a character or think of a personality for a certain character?
Usually, with all my novels so far, there's always a character that around the third or fourth draft I realise I need to do more work on. There's always one character that I haven't quite developed. They haven't quite come to the page with the ease that the others have. So, Gus came easily, Eemer came easily. I did need to push her a little. She was so quiet. She was, the first few drafts, she was almost too quiet on the page as well. I had to push her a bit. Doug, as I said, was the one that I had to go back in and say, okay, who is Doug? You're falling between Cuchulainn and your character, you need to really get to grips with who he is. And that was probably 3 or 4 drafts in that I really started to look for him and find him.
What was the publishing process like for On Midnight Beach?
The book would have been turned down in the early stages by maybe 7 publishers, early days, and then eventually. But I took into account what they were feeding me back, and then I really got in and did a really clean push on it. I felt this was my last attempt at it, and I got a grant from the Arts Council, and that allowed me to spend another 6 months and go in and push myself on it. And at that point, my agent put it in front of Annie Eaton in Faber, and Annie took the book, and it's the least edits I've ever had. She rang me and she had 5 things, and 2 of them were word changes. She wanted a curse removed in one place and something else in some other place. And then, slightly bigger thing, she wanted a bit more of Doug and Eemer's romance in another place. And she said, can we have more of Maeve? So they were very small. I'd never had such a small. And she said to me, this is a really clean manuscript. She said, I could almost publish it as it is, And then after that, though I did way more editing than she asked for. I felt it needed more work. And then when it got to the real end of it, they were great. They really involved me in the cover, which isn't often. The author has very, very little or no say in the cover, and I have had a cover foisted on me for one of my novels, which I didn't agree with, and it didn't help sell the book, in my opinion. But this one, I kept coming back and saying no, and but they went with me, and I think we wound up with a great cover. I was a bit concerned about it being too romantic, the cover, with some of the versions that they had. I know it still may not be one that I don't know, the lads here might be able to tell me whether they'd pick this up in a shop. I know it still probably looks like it's intended for female audience, but some of the covers were way more romantic looking. And also we had a lot of chatter around the title, because the title I had started with was a translation of the Tá, and I was calling it Raid. And they said, look, we all think it sounds like Vikings. So I took their point. And then we were calling it the Dolphin Wars, but we realised that sounded young. It sounded middle grade. And then we went through a whole list, and it was weeks. And then the editor came up with The Midnight Beach, and I said, no, On Midnight Beach. And then we had it. So.
When you're trying to sell a novel, do you think the cover and title of the novel has an impact on the book selling?
I do, yeah, really, very much so. And as I say, I saw that with one of my books. The title and the cover didn't match the story inside. And they also made the book look and sound like it was older. It sounded like a romance. So it was falling out of its age group. I think this looks YA, and that's important, because I wouldn't really like to think of a 10-year-old reading. It's not intended for kind of under 13s, so it needs to be pitched right. And of course, how do we end up with a book except we put our hand out to a cover and a title that appeals to us? So it's the first point of contact for people, so it's really important.
And so when you're do you write the blurbs for your books?
I did. What I usually do is the editor usually writes a blurb and then gives it to me, and then I pull it apart and writes it again, and it goes forwards and backwards. Often editors write the blurb, but the first time an editor wrote a blurb for me on my first book, she gave away the twist at the end. So I said, you can't do that. So, sorry, usually, yes, I would. We went back and forwards, the same thing. The blurb is, again, once you've gotten this far, you picked it up, that's your next move. And then if this doesn't get you, you're not going to open it. So it's title, cover, and then blurb, and then hopefully you'll go inside. So yeah, I'm inclined to stay on top of these things because I want the book to be picked up for sure.
When you're trying to like put a blurb together for a book, is it hard not to give away too much of the story in the blurb?
It's hard to figure out how to balance that. You need to give away enough to entice people in, but not so much that you've given away part of the story. So sometimes you might ask questions in order to intrigue the person who's reading the blurb. It's really tricky, and a lot of time gets spent on it, going forwards and backwards, trying to pin it down to something that you really feel will catch people and introduce it. So it was really important with this one to make sure the dolphin was mentioned, because that's probably going to intrigue people. So the dolphin had to be mentioned, but also that the hint of romance and the hint of violence, I wanted them both to be there. And that it didn't just come across as a romance, that there was that hint that there was more in there than romance, that there was going to be violence in there.
What advice would you give to new authors?
Ooh, this always sounds so trite, but right. I mean, that's because sitting staring at the page, what I said about the SFDs, like nothing good comes out. And very, very few people write beautiful first drafts. I only know one writer that I know that writes that way, and she does it by literally carrying the story and writing the drafts inside her head until she's fit to burst, and then she locks herself into the house with food for 4 weeks and spills it out, and she writes these incredible first drafts in beautiful handwriting, but she's the only person I know who does that. Most people's first drafts are an absolute mess. And their second. So it's that thing of not just sitting staring at the computer or staring at the page, just write and expect it to be rubbish and expect it to make loads of changes. That's the only way you get to the point of having a story that in the end is readable and working, is writing. It's also the only way you find your own voice. It's the only way you'll get to the point where you find the voice that's particular to you.
Do you ever get approached by, say, young authors or up and coming authors, like being asked for advice on whatever it is they might be writing?
Mostly because I'm known as a picture book maker for a long time. A lot of the people that will be approaching me are picture book writers or illustrators. So over the years, yes, lots. I'd have looked at a lot of ideas for people and looked at a lot of people's portfolios and talked them through. At the moment I'm mentoring somebody, a picture book maker. So I suppose I'm still considered a new, even though my first book came out in 2006, I still might see myself as a new novelist, which is a bit daft, but yeah, I suppose I haven't gotten to the point where I feel I'm ready to advise people or even teach classes, where I teach classes as a picture book maker. I'm still learning.
And do you prefer to do picture books or do you prefer to do novels?
When I'm doing one, at the moment I'm working on a picture book, and for the last 2 years I've been working on 2 picture books. One's finished, one's nearly finished. I'm just dying to get to one of the novel ideas. But when I was working on this, I was dying to get to the picture book. I was dying to be drawing. So it's very much, I really would love to be rolling from one to the other, because now I want to do both.
When you were younger and starting off writing and doing the picture books, was there any author in particular that you looked up to and were like, I want to be like this person?
I've always loved Helen Oxenbury's work, and she's just a gorgeous drafts person. You know, she just does gorgeous line. and Martin Waddell, when I was starting out, his bear books and his owl books would have been coming out then, and beautiful stories. He's from Northern Ireland, and million-selling author. So beautiful stories. Yeah, lots of people. I love Sean Tan's work. I love Oliver Jeffers' work. I love Mary Murphy's work. There's hundreds of people. Yeah.
Sorry, now I've checked my notes for this. But so you've won 4 Children's Books Ireland's Awards, and you've been nominated for the I don't know if it's CILIP or CILIP.
Carnegie, CILIP Carnegie, medal.
Yeah.
That was recent. Yeah.
Yeah, how did that all feel?
The Carnegie, the awards are always wonderful, and I've been very lucky that I've, right from the beginning of my career, my first book, there've been a lot of awards, which is really encouraging, particularly any time that things were going badly. I've had a few big bumps in my career when it felt like I wasn't going to get published again, and then it's very nice to look at the awards on the wall and go, okay, some people think you're really good at this, just hang on in there. The Carnegie and the Kate Greenaway are those 2 medals that you're talking about, and they were always a distant dream. They're UK awards, they're the oldest and really, really prestigious awards. Being shortlisted for the Carnegie was a dream come true. I can now switch my dream to being shortlisted for the Kate Greenaway. And it's been great fun being part of that, and I'll always have that on my books from now on, a Carnegie shortlisted author, because it's really a prestigious thing. But for me, the best thing that came out of that was there's a shadowing thing where teens in schools all over the UK shadow those awards. And I got a lot of feedback from them, and there was a place where I could go and see their reviews. So literally hundreds of reviews from my readers for my book. And I've never had that before, access to that before. And it was just to see such raw, emotional responses to my writing. It just really made me feel like, okay, I'm reaching the audience I'm writing for, because most awards are judged by adults. So, okay, adults like my work, but that's not any good if my actual audience aren't being reached. And at least with the Carnegie, I know I reached my audience.
When you're reading feedback from whatever audiences the book's aimed at, would you ever take advice from one book and kind of interpret it in your next novel in some sort of way? I would pay attention to, like I saw some of the readers were having difficulty with the switch between the voices, the switch between Eemer and Gus. Some of the readers said they only realised halfway through the book or something that they were confused by the switch between the voices. So I suppose I'd look to see if we could signal that more clearly. I know the name is there at the beginning of each chapter, but some people kind of just missed it. So things like that, I might look for, what does that tell me about how I write in future? So yeah, I would be paying attention to that kind of thing.
Do you have any plans for future projects, or even possibly a sequel to On Midnight Beach?
I can't imagine writing a sequel because it's from a legend, but you never know. Maeve may turn around and ask to have a book of her own or something like that. At the moment, I have 3 novels sort of started. One is middle grade and 2 of them are YA. So it'll be which one do I go for first, and getting stuck into them. And they take time, but I'm really looking forward to that. But I have to finish the picture book I'm on at the moment first.
I think we'll go for questions from people.
So you mentioned working with the UK and stuff for like the shortlisted awards. As an Irish author, do you find it hard to like expose yourself to international audiences, or does it come quite easy?
I'm used to the picture books. I'm used to being published around the world because picture books, that's the way they work. They look for co-editions. So there'd be co-editions in Finland of some of the books, say in Finland, all over Europe, Germany, France, Australia, the States, Korea, Japan, China, Peru, Iran is probably one of the far out kind of ones that I've come across. The novels, I'm used to working with UK publishers and American publishers, but last year this book came out in April 2nd last year, right at the beginning of lockdown, and the publishers didn't know what to do at that point, and I didn't know what to do. You know, it was new to everybody. None of us knew how to bring a book out in lockdown. They kind of learned how to do it in the last year. But because this book was published by a UK publisher, it got great reviews here, but the Irish bookshops couldn't bring it in. They weren't allowed to bring in stock from the UK. So it wasn't here until July. So that was very odd, not having a launch, not doing school visits, you know, that was really weird. So in a way, the shortlisting for the Irish Book Awards, the shortlisting for the Carnegie, has meant the book got a second chance because it kind of fell into a COVID-shaped hole last year. So it got a second chance with the awards, which was great.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
You mentioned how encouraging the awards were, especially like for completing your books, writing your books. So would any other things motivate you?
The need to earn, for sure. And just that thing of, you know, well, at my age, it's kind of, what else am I going to do? This is the only thing I know how to do. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there have been a few dips, and I have an agent, which really helps. And yeah, there's been a bad year every now and then, and it really is keeping my nose down, following my gut that that's a good idea. And if I just keep working on it, somebody's going to see that it's a good idea and take it. So that's what happened with this. Yes, the Arts Council have given me a few grants, and I know for myself and other people that have gotten literary bursaries, it has bought us time. You know, it kind of buys you 6 months or a year when you're now obliged, because you've been given money, you're obliged to do the work. So you get down and you do it. And that's really what, you know, it's the only reason this book ended up being published, was because that bought me the time to do that last draft that got it over the line. So yeah, it can be very rocky kind of even for somebody who's been there as long as I have. And people might think I just roll from book deal to book deal. I don't. You know, you need to be a best-selling author to be always published easily. Yeah, and of course, one of the problems for publishers with me is I haven't got a brand. I haven't gone with this kind of picture book and just kept producing the same-ish book, which is a lot easier for a publisher. They know what to expect, they know where to put you, and people know what to expect and they know what they're going to buy. I've flipped around from one thing to the other. It's just the way my head works and there's nothing I can do about it. And the switch to novels startled everybody, and then I went to a different, this is the first YA book, you know, now I'm going to work on a middle grade book. It's like, would you ever pick a box and stay in it? So I can see it, that's difficult for publishers, and it's meant that I've gone to different publishers for different books, because Faber aren't going to do my picture books, they're going to do YA novels. so I need to do another YA novel in order to attract another deal from them. Whereas I have a picture book publisher in New York, but he wants a particular type of idea, and so there's a new book coming out with him in July that I've done with Michael Emberley, and but he's not interested in some of my other picture book ideas, so it's like, yeah.
Thank you.
I've made life a bit difficult for myself.
Hello.
Hi.
How would you find writing books for an older audience compared to your picture books?
Completely different. My first novel was middle grade, and I resisted writing it for, I'd say, about 6 years. The idea was that the character G just wouldn't shut up. It was like he wanted to be written, and he'd keep surfacing and saying, when's it my turn? I think, I don't want to write a novel. You know, I know it's going to be a big learning curve. It's going to be a whole set of skills that I don't have, because picture book writing is completely different. Writing picture books would be a bit more like writing poetry. It's very tight and condensed, and every word is so important. You don't put any spare words into a picture book. And it's all about sound and rhythm and a whole other thing. And then you've got the pictures, obviously. So it's a completely different way of writing. And I'd never written a novel, so now when I sat down to do it, I knew it was going to be a huge learning curve, and it took me years to write that first book. I was lucky that I found an editor who was interested, and he actually held my hand through it. It would have gone in the bin. I mean, an awful lot of people's first novels, second and third novels, go in the bin. I heard Darren Shan say it was his 9th novel that was taken, so 8 went in the bin. So, I mean, that's people learn and toss and learn and toss. I was lucky that I got to work my first novel right through to publication. When I came to do my second novel, I was surprised at how much easier it was. I realised, I have the basics now. I mean, it's still always difficult. They still always present something. But yeah, whole other skill set. And then going to YA, again, I had to change my voice a bit. I had to change the way I was looking at what I was writing. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, so you mentioned releasing this book during the pandemic, and I know that sounded difficult for you. And did you find that your ideas and inspiration was influenced by the pandemic, or was it more challenging to come up with ideas and keep writing?
I was working on a picture book, and I talked to my editor in Faber, and they actually stopped taking dark YA over the last year, and I heard a few publishers doing that. They felt it wasn't where everybody's heads were at, that they didn't want to bring out dark YA in the next year or so, because I suppose people's reading habits changed, people's viewing habits changed, and also it wasn't where I wanted my head to be. It didn't feel like a good place to be myself in my head, locked in a house, locked in the idea I probably would have gone for is pretty dark, and it felt like, well, maybe not. So that's when the middle grade idea came up, and I wrote a first draft of it, and it's very comfort reading, kind of an adventure story, a bit like books I would have read when I was 10, 11, 12, and it felt like an easier place for my head to inhabit last year.
Thank you so much.
Why did you choose to write the book with 2 perspectives, and why did you choose Eemer and Gus?
Okay, good question. I originally thought I was just going to go with Eemer, and then realised the original Táin, it switches between the two sides. You're with Cuchulainn for part of it, you're with Maeve and Fergus for part of it. And I realised that if I was going to write in first person, the difficulty with writing with first person is you only know what that person knows. So you've got the whole other side of the story is not represented. You're only seeing it from one side. So because there's two sides to the story, it's two towns going to war, having two voices made sense. And as I said before, Fergus and Gus, they just really came alive for me. So Gus became the natural other voice. And I did want to write in first person. So two first persons. And as I say, then I had a third person that got chucked. So, and then it made sense when it was in two voices, it really felt stronger. Yeah.
So when I was reading the book, I was wondering about the dolphins and if they were like a metaphor of sorts, or like what was their role apart from their role in the story.
I suppose I'd never really thought about the fact that the bulls in the original story are mirroring the action, particularly between Cuchulainn and Ferdia, until I was writing it and realised, oh, you know, it is like a mirror story. And I don't know if you know the original story, but the original story, the bulls are actually magicians. They're magical bulls. There were two magicians who were pig herders, I think, and they were friends, best friends, and then they become enemies. And when they become enemies, they shapeshift, and through time, they shapeshift into all sorts of different creatures and battle each other. And finally, they become the Don, the brown bull, and the white bull. And they're these enormous bulls that 50 children can sit on their backs and all sorts of mad things like that. And then in the end, after the death of Cuchulainn and Ferdia, they come across each other and they literally battle all over Ireland, and there are place names all over Ireland after them. The brown bull kills the white bull and then dies himself. So there had to be two dolphins. That's why the other dolphin turns up. And there had to be that mirror happening because I did want to keep that element of the original.
I was just wondering, you mentioned you've done novels and picture books. Have you done any other type of writing, like poetry or short stories?
I've written one short story for a book called Once Upon a Place that Owen Colfer put together when he was laureate in Ogue. And I suppose when I wrote the prologue of On Midnight Beach, it felt like a short story, and it can be taken out and read on its own if you like. Other than that, no. I guess I wrote a bit of poetry the other day, and that's the first time I've ever done that. So that was an odd one. It's probably rubbish, but we'll see. But again, I would see it as something that I could be going back to time and time again. I would never leave a piece of writing alone. The picture books might be sometimes there's only 50 words in a picture book, sometimes only a couple of hundred. But I would be going back over and over that text, honing it. All the time that I was working on the pictures, I'd be revisiting and revisiting. So.
I was just wondering, did you ever have like a moment where you realised that, you know, you wanted to write professionally?
I did art in college and did illustration as part of my design course, and I realised in college I wanted to illustrate children's picture books. That was when I realised that. I came out and tried to get into illustration, and I realised it was going to be really difficult to get a publisher to take me on, and that's when I wrote my first story. And then I realised I wanted to write. Now I'd always written, but art had always been number one. And then I started writing, and then I got to the point where most of my books I've written them myself. I've illustrated a few picture books for other people. So writing became just as important to me. So really, I suppose I see myself as a story maker, the whole package. That was a slow realisation, though. It probably took a decade for me to realise that writing was just as important to me as illustrating.
Thank you.
I think that's it for questions from the audience. Thank you very much for talking to us today. It's nice to see you.
Thanks very much for having me.